that is joining this call today. We do want to welcome you to the Train the Trainer session for curriculum assessments as it relates to the Ohio Manufacturing Competency Model. This session will be recorded today. We're recording this to send out to all of you, so that way this is an ongoing tool in your pocket to be able to reference back to in terms of how to use the competency model to better align your manufacturing or industry-specific modules to the needs defined by our Ohio manufacturers. And I'll go into that here shortly. Before I move forward, we are going to use a number of activities today. So that requires the documents that Victoria had sent to you all prior to this call. If you do not have this information, it was not emailed to you, please use the chat function and drop your email in the chat. We will make sure we get those documents to you before we get started today, but those should be near the top of your inbox as of about 10 minutes ago. So to get us started and open things up with the agenda, I'd first like to introduce myself. Welcome, everybody. My name is Nick Asdorian. I'm a workforce strategist at Accenture. But what we do here at Accenture is we put the hats of our clients on. And so today, my colleagues and I will be representing our partners at the Ohio Manufacturers Association and Ohio TechNet, who have really been leading the charge on the development of Ohio's manufacturing competency model. That comes with the support of the Governor's Office of Workforce Transformation, in which this original concept stemmed out of one of the workforce strategies, the Auto and Advanced Mobility workforce strategy that the Lieutenant Governor and OMA had co-published back in June of 2023. And so this has now spun out and taken legs of its own and is now being established across the state with our partners at OACC, OACTS, ODHE, ODU, and many, many more. So thank you for those who have partnered with us thus far. We're excited to get into what will be a jam-packed 2-hour agenda. We will try to make sure that we keep it as light and fun and give you as many opportunities to participate as possible. And so before we roll into all the activities, I'll give you all a quick overview of the initiative at large, talk about the competency model and its use cases. Our team will then walk through a little bit deeper dives into that. And then you'll notice at 4 through 6, we've got some interactive activities. We want this to be a very, very engaging session for you all to learn how to use the competency model ultimately as a tool to promote your programs that relate to manufacturing or one of the specific industry modules that were developed by manufacturers. So we got a few objectives today. And so the first is to help you all better understand the competency model. I'll hit that shortly. We'll give you a little. Oh, looks like I got muted there. We want to give you a little bit more familiarity with the curriculum assessment use cases and the benefits of using the competency model, both for you and for employers and manufacturers. We're going to get you that hands-on experience so you're really rolling in the weeds with us and able to get comfortable piloting the usage of these tools that the team has built. And then finally, we'll kind of have some Q&A and stuff and talk about how you can actually use the results from the assessment to better inform any gaps, opportunities, partnerships with manufacturers, local and industry sector partnerships, and the OMA at large. So really trying to create a demand-driven model where you all have the opportunity to better partner with employers and manufacturers to solve their demand problems and create programs that really they're going to want to source talent from, and therefore you're going to gain more enrollment in. So that's the ultimate goal here today. All right. So what is the Ohio Manufacturing Competency Model? This initiative, as I stated, stemmed from the Auto and Advanced Mobility Workforce Strategy. A lot of great growth going on in the state of Ohio in manufacturing as a number of new industries enter the state, such as semiconductor and EV, while others continue to thrive and grow, such as aerospace and defense or industrial products, food manufacturing, just to name a few. What we had found across the workforce development ecosystem was that there were a number of industries entering and growing, but most importantly, manufacturers at the sector level had a lot of the same common needs and skills. So we'll get this file back up for you guys here in a second. But what I'll talk to you is something that we will really ingrain and burn in your all's heads, and it's the competency model pyramid. And so as you look at this pyramid, the concept of the competency model, it actually came out of the Department of Labor's Career One-Stop competency model, and we established and grew with that. And you see a number of employers that the OMA brought in and engaged to get into the weeds. Actually 17 hours worth of workshopping, along with a number of office hours and working sessions on the side to create an inventory of topics and knowledge, skill, and ability statements. See, this is a giant filing cabinet of knowledge, skill, and ability statements in which over 115 stakeholders in industry co-developed with us over the last few months. This model, as you see this pyramid scheme, starts at the foundational layer and talks about what are the types of knowledge, skill, and abilities that are needed to be successful in the workplace as an individual. And then it gets way more specific when you start to talk about the industry-related knowledge, skill, and ability needs. And so what we worked to do with manufacturers was define that manufacturing sector layer, that light orange layer, and say, what are the common skill needs across all of you manufacturers for certain roles that we called operator or technician occupation groups? And so we worked with them to say, where are you the same? Help me better understand where you all are the same so we can better help our partners, our educators, our workforce developers, and training providers understand where they can find that scalability in programming and align those needs. And then after we did all of that work, we said, all right, now we'll give you an opportunity, at least for EV and battery manufacturing, as well as in aerospace and defense. Those were our first two pilots. We said, we forced you for so long to tell us where you're the same. Please now tell us where you're different. You know, we'll give you all the time in the world. Tell us where you're different in these industries. And the results were quite staggering. I think many of us in the workforce world probably wouldn't be shocked to hear, but they were quite clear that there were so many knowledge, skill, and ability statements that were deemed really highly critical by our manufacturers that sat at the base manufacturing layer opposed to at that industry layer. The percentages, I'll have to get those back out. I'll make sure I respond in the chat. I don't want to misrepresent. But it was only about 7% at that entry level or operator level workforce of highly critical knowledge, skill, and ability statements sat at the industry specific layer, opposed to I believe over 60% that sat at the manufacturing layer. So all that to say, we have an opportunity here in the state of Ohio to think about the emergence of these new industries to create more enrollment, more opportunities for all manufacturers in the state in what the Ohio Manufacturers Association has deemed the force multiplication effect. And so I think it's a really exciting time to be in Ohio, to have these types of tools at our disposal, and I'm excited to kind of move forward with this training. So that's a little bit on the competency model. I talked about there are being specific roles in which we scoped this work around. So as we built the knowledge, skill, and ability statements around certain sets of roles, I really want to focus your attention on the blue and orange groups. So we used the shared competencies to define, well, your entry level or operator family group of roles that are depicted below. We built knowledge, skill, and ability statements around that grouping. So trying to stay vague enough that it related to as many manufacturers as possible at the sector layer, but also specific enough that we could be very clear on what we were talking about here. We also then did that for the technician or mid-level grouping. This does not focus, I'll be clear, on the engineering or advanced type of roles. We do not feel that that was necessarily a need in terms of helping manufacturers better align their skill needs for engineers, but we did see an opportunity here to really hone in on the operator and technician manufacturers groups. So with that, I will pass things off to my colleague, Victoria Powers, who led most of this work and spent those many hours with the manufacturers here in the great state of Ohio. Victoria?
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. And good afternoon, everybody. Excited to be with you all here today. So Nick talked about the different layers of the competency model. So I want to talk a little bit more about what is actually contained within the competency model, and when you crack them open, what are you going to find? So there's 4 sets of competency repositories or libraries, each associated with a different layer of the Ohio manufacturing competency model. So the first one in red here is the foundational competency model. So this is inclusive of the first 3 tiers within the pyramid. So this is going to include your personal effectiveness, academic, and workplace competencies. These aren't necessarily manufacturing specific, but generally they're skills and competencies needed for success, both in school and at work. So within this repository, you're going to find things like dependability, reliability, communication, and ability to work with a team. And as Nick mentioned, these foundational competencies often form the prerequisites to successful acquisition of those sector-wide, industry-specific, and then at the very top of the pyramid, the employer-specific competencies, which are the utmost tier of the competency model. And then moving to the second, third, and fourth repository. So that's where the largest amount of effort was spent during this initiative was on repositories 2, 3, and 4. So the second one is the manufacturing sector-wide competency model. So these are the skills and competencies fundamental to the sector at large for those entry and mid-level operator and technician types of positions. And these are going to be those shared competencies across all of the manufacturing industries. And then the third and fourth repositories, those are the industry-specific ones. So the industry-specific tiers are going to capture the increasingly specialized competencies unique to both EV battery and EVSE manufacturing, and then also to aerospace and defense. So those are the 4 competency model repository sets. We'll crack into them in a second here. But these are generally kind of the 4 documents that form the meat or really the data of what's within these competency models. So that's a little bit of lay of the land on the model repositories. And then once you click into each of the model repositories, you're going to find that they're organized according to this hierarchy here. So 4 layers to the hierarchy, and at the broadest level is the competency level. So this is going to be the broadest level of skill categorization. And this competency level represents a clustering of related skills that contribute to a specific area of expertise. And then from that, competencies are going to break down into subcompetencies, which is the next level of skill categorization. So, for example, a competency might be production and operations, and then your subcompetency might be, within this example, we've got preventative and predictive maintenance planning, troubleshooting, and monitoring. So those are all subcompetencies that fall within the maintenance, install, and repair competency. Then at the third layer down, we've got topics. So further narrowing down subcompetencies into specific activities. And then at the most detailed level of the competency models, level 4 here is going to be our knowledge, skill, and ability statements. So the knowledge, skill, and ability statements are really going to identify expected demonstration of mastery or proficiency. They're really the how somebody would demonstrate mastery for the specific topic. So I think of the first 3 layers of the hierarchy as describing the what, and then the KSA level, or that 4th level down, is the description of the how. And many of you on the call might be familiar with the BILT, Business and Industry Leadership Team, KSA framing. So that's very similar to the KSA statements we've used within this Ohio manufacturing competency model as well. So that's a little bit on the repositories themselves and then how they are structured. So we'll move just to a quick knowledge check here. I'll ask maybe one of my colleagues if they wouldn't mind putting the Menti link in the chat. And I'll ask just a first question we have here about the Ohio Manufacturing Competency Model? Okay, and I'll show the screen once we get a few answers populating here. But our first question is, put the hierarchy labels in order from broadest to most specific.
If you're using Menti, we had some folks in our last session that were unable to access it due to some firewalls. You can always feel free to use your cell phone as well. Menti is great with a cell phone.
You seeing some answers come through here? We'll just wait for a minute or so. Yeah, fantastic job. That's right. So yeah, as we just went through competency, highest level, most broad, breaks down into sub-competency. From there, you get into topics, and then at the most detailed level is the knowledge, skill, and ability statement. So that is spot on. All right. I will pass it to my colleague Kelsey to walk us through. We'll crack open what one of these repositories actually looks like and how you can navigate it in Excel. Kelsey, over to you.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Victoria. Let me pop up my screen here. All right. Look good here, team?
It is still coming through.
Okay. All right. Just let me know.
Perfect. Yep, we can see it now.
Okay. Awesome. All right, so now we went over all the fun theoretical stuff of the model, but this is the model here itself. So we're just going to take a quick high-level walkthrough of the competency model together. So this is just our manufacturing sector-wide competency model. As mentioned, we have 4 different repositories. For sake of this demo, we're just going to be looking through at that manufacturing sector-wide level. So this is encompasses all shared competencies throughout the entire manufacturing sector across all the different industries. So first, I'm just going to start by going through the different columns. So starting here with column A, this is our first column. This is the number column. So this is the numerical hierarchy of the competency model. So competencies correspond to a whole number. In this case, 4. So if you see a 4, that's going to correspond to a competency. At that top most hierarchy level, as Victoria showed. And then as you go down into the depth of the model, so sub-competencies, topics, and KSAs, each level of specificity will increase by 1 decimal point. So we have our competencies, which is our highest level. So those are going to be the whole numbers. Adding 1 decimal place corresponds to a sub-competency, and so on and so forth with our topics and KSAs. Kind of gave it away a little bit here, but column B is our type column. So this more explicitly shows the designated competency, sub-competency topic, and KSA hierarchy that Victoria outlined earlier in this session. So each letter corresponds to the level of the hierarchy. So we got C for competency, SC for sub-competency, D for topic, and then we got knowledge, skill, and ability statements. Moving to the right to column C, this is the description column. So this is where all of the depth of the model is housed. So this is the actual specific competency content. So you'll see the competency, you'll see the sub-competency, and then its resulting topics in KSAs. Something else that's kind of helpful to note is this model is color-coded. So all competencies are going to be seen in orange. All sub-competencies are going to be seen in yellow. And then topics, dark gray, KSA statements, light gray. So that's another kind of like quick tip for deciphering some of the information within our competency models here. And then where the more fun stuff kind of comes in is our occupation levels. So columns D through F specify at which occupation level a KSA is relevant. So if we're looking at tolerancing, we can see that there's X's and within the entry column for the knowledge and skill statement. So we know that the K and the S of the tolerancing topic is relevant at the entry level, while the ability statement is relevant at the mid-level. So that's seeing the denotation there. So if there's an X within the respective column, it means that it applies to that specific occupation level. There is in some cases X's within like multiple occupation levels for one KSA, but you can kind of see as you go over to the right that while it is relevant at both entry and mid levels, it'll be relevant at a different degree. So kind of leading into talking about criticality. So one entry level KSA or one KSA that's relevant at both entry and mid level may have different criticalities or another way to think about it is levels of importance for job success between the two occupation levels. So that kind of feeds into columns G through I, which highlight the criticality of KSA. So it can either be low, medium, or high criticality. And basically criticality in our modeling measures the level of importance for like successful job performance. So if something is low criticality, it's not necessarily super crucial for successful job performance, whereas you find a KSA that's high criticality, like this one right here, and we would know that it would be of the utmost importance to have that competency mastery in order to be successful within your position. So we have all of the criticalities in all for across all KSAs, regardless of occupation level within columns G through I. And then lastly, for column J, for any entry level relevant KSA, we have employer deemed like training expectations. So this will either be something that a KSA should be learned through curriculum, and we would make that recommendation to educators for including it within their curriculum, or it would be recommended as OJT on the job training. So something that someone will just learn while on the job within the first couple weeks or so. So that is the full competency model content. Like mentioned before, a lot of this comes directly from Ohio manufacturers. We've done a lot of refinement, a lot of iteration. So this really is a tool unique to Ohio. We can go ahead and hop back to the larger deck, Victoria. Awesome. Now that we kind of have seen a brief overview and fundamental understanding, does anyone have any questions regarding the competency model or any of its content? I think it was mentioned in the chat as well, but the competency model repositories are currently being housed on the Ohio competency model landing page, which we have, and it's open source, so you can feel free to use it, download it, play around with it however you'd like. It is on, the link is in the chat as well. But any questions before we move on?
Again, we know that is a lot of information in a short amount of time, so we're going to get into the weeds and actually start using the tool for the use case that mostly aligns to you all as educators, program developers, curriculum developers in this space, and hopefully you'll hear some more, learn some more, have some more questions along the way. But that's how this all stemmed and came about. And again, I implore you all to join us on that landing page in the coming weeks and check out some more stuff as OMA continues to publish new content there.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. And yeah, we have all the additional use case toolkits on there as well, which feeds nicely into our next set of slides here. So we can go ahead and go forward. All right, so now that we've discussed how the competency model was built and the contents of the Excel model repository, we can showcase a little bit more of what to do with the actual model. It is important to note that displayed on the screen here are the different applications of the competency model. So these are ways to implement the competency model repositories that I just walked through, but the applications themselves are not relevant without the use of those repositories that are shown. So just something to note while going through these next couple of use cases here. So while our primary focus today is on the specific curriculum assessment use case, there are numerous additional use cases for this competency model. So I'm just going to touch on a high level a few that we have displayed here today. The first being career pathways. So this is a way for people to leverage the competency model to identify advancement within an organization or industry. You could additionally use it as a reference tool to develop stackable credentials as well. Next, we have regional training mapping. So this is giving ISPs the ability to assess regional strengths or gaps based on competency coverage. The first step within this use case actually starts with a curriculum assessment. So the two feed right into each other. Continuing on, we have the employee assessment. So this is giving employers the ability to fairly and objectively assess their employees based on competency model content and kind of gauge their advancement readiness throughout the occupation levels. We have train the trainer program enhancement. So this is just a really good way to inform on-the-job training using those critical competencies that we've outlined in our repositories. Talent pipeline management. So you can use the competency model to update job posting language. This can be used during like resume screening, helping like build a more cohesive structure for the interview process, and also just helping compare candidates that are qualified for the job. But like I mentioned, our main use case of focus today is the curriculum assessment. So the curriculum assessment is used to align employer and skilled labor needs and highlight curriculum gaps or redundancies. So we'll go ahead and go to our main overview. So now that we're aligned on the competency model's many use cases, we can kind of dive into this main area of focus, the thing that everyone is here and very excited for, which is our curriculum assessment. So what exactly is a curriculum assessment? So a curriculum assessment is a process in which manufacturing curriculum can be compared directly to the competency model at that knowledge, skill, and ability level, so at our most detailed level to evaluate alignment. This assessment helps identify areas where curriculum may need some improvement to better match Ohio's competency needs, so better aligning employer and educator needs. And the curriculum assessment is conducted and utilized by educators and promoted both by OMA and our ISPs. So there's numerous benefits for performing a curriculum assessment, but a few of the highlights that we'll include here today is promoting collaboration. So this process facilitates collaboration between educational institutions, ISPs, and employers. It ensures that curricula are in line with both the needs of students and the manufacturing industry in Ohio. Additionally, we have enhanced educator guidance. So by identifying those specific areas needed for improvement through the curriculum assessment, educators can gain a clear roadmap for making those necessary curriculum enhancements. So this targeted approach empowers educators to better prepare students coming into the workforce. Lastly, we have just student upskilling. Ultimately, this alignment results in students being better equipped with the skills and knowledge necessary to excel within the manufacturing sector. So those are just a few of the many benefits of performing a curriculum assessment. But additionally, performing a curriculum assessment can provide key insights, such as alignment with manufacturer needs. Educators can address how curriculum can more closely align with the specific competent needs of Ohio manufacturers, ensuring that the graduates meet those industry standards. Additionally, there's a very clear role for the ISP's role in curriculum promotion. Educators can explore different strategies for ISPs to promote curricula that effectively addresses critical employer needs, helping in turn to foster stronger connections between both education and the industry. And then lastly, the ability for supplementary content identification. So through this process, educators can identify additional content that can complement existing manufacturing curricula, which will in turn enrich their learning experience for students. So on the next slide, we're going to take a deeper dive into the full curriculum assessment process, but at a high level, we can break down the process into 3 key steps. So step 1 involves evaluation of local education programs. This first step involves basically a baseline assessment for a curriculum alignment. Step 2 involves identification and classification of coverage levels. So educators will then identify and classify the level of coverage each KSA receives within the curriculum being evaluated. And this step basically just helps pinpoint areas for improvement. Then our final step entails recommendation and implementation of curriculum modifications. So based on the findings, recommendations are made to modify or update the curriculum to better align with Ohio competency needs. And this is fully based on The educator will take their own approach, but we do have like a basic outline of how we think that those implementations can be made. But this will basically just ensure continuous improvement and relevance within Ohio education. All right, we can hop to the next slide here. So tying up our curriculum assessment overview, it can be seen that aligning manufacturing curriculum with Ohio's competency needs is a strategic initiative that will be benefiting educators, students, and industry stakeholders. I know it's kind of a lot, but this is where we'll be narrowing our focus in for today. Does anyone have any questions on any of the preliminary content or any of the other competency model applications? All right, Victoria, I'll pass it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Kelsey. So we'll get some hands-on experience running a curriculum assessment live in the call in a couple minutes here. But just to go over the steps, start to finish, soup to nuts, for how to conduct a curriculum assessment. So first step here is probably the most straightforward one, which is selecting the manufacturing curriculum to assess against the competency model. So we mentioned the competency model is reflective of those entry and mid-level needs. So generally manufacturing curriculum that is foundational, manufacturing fundamentals, manufacturing like operator 101 types of courses, those are going to be best suited to assess against the competency model. Step two, obtaining the curriculum content. So using learning outcomes, bodies of knowledge, course modules, homework assignments, lab activities, study guides, those are all going to be used as your input material to compare against the competency model in step three. So in step three, that's where you're actually doing the crosswalk between the course content and the individual KSA statements within the competency model. So you're comparing coverage, and we'll go over what curriculum coverage is in a second here, and mapping that to each of the rows within the file Kelsey shared a couple minutes back. And then fourth step here, so based on the results of the crosswalk, so what was my coverage of each of the KSA statements, and then how critical were the KSA statements, and that will have already been determined by Ohio manufacturers. You can start to deduce like a matrix or a prioritization of recommendations coming out of that as well. So that's step four. And then step five is kind of putting together and implementing an action plan based on your curriculum's coverage of the competency model. And the action plan could look many of different ways. Perhaps you're saying that there's already great alignment between your curriculum and the manufacturing competency model. So the curriculum assessment can be used as a tool to go approach industry sector partnerships or manufacturers to highlight the industry-ready talent that are graduating from your program. In other cases, maybe you're finding that your curriculum has some gaps, and that's an opportunity to work with manufacturers to maybe create some work-based learning opportunities, or develop new course modules with manufacturers providing case studies, or working with other education institutions who have coverage of some of those topics to do resource and knowledge sharing. So action planning can look a lot of different ways, but the step four, the recommended actions, will be a really good input and starting place for some ideas for the action planning. So let's take a look at actually getting into the curriculum assessment and how you would assess coverage. So there's three definitions that we've been using to categorize curriculum coverage, and they're gap, exposure, and thorough coverage. So you can think of these as like three different ends on a scale here. So gap essentially means that the KSA is not covered within curriculum, or it's very, very minimally covered. So examples of this, pretty straightforward. It's simply not present in the curriculum. It's absent from assignments or lab modules. So that would be considered a gap. And then there's two different flavors of coverage, and that's exposure and thorough coverage. So think of exposure as like right in the middle between gap and thorough. So it means that students are getting surface level introduction to the content. It's providing a basic understanding, but maybe isn't going really in depth, or doesn't have a bunch of associated homework or hands-on activities tied to that. And on the far most right side of coverage, so the most detailed level, is thorough coverage. So this implies that the curriculum is going really in depth on that specific KSA statement. It goes beyond that surface level knowledge, and it is going really deep into that specific area. So examples of this could look like multiple homework assignments, multiple lab-based activities, discussion or team-based activities to make sure that that student has that thorough understanding, or thoroughly applying that specific KSA statement. So three different levels here to map and categorize curriculum coverage. So how do you use curriculum coverage and that gap exposure thorough in conjunction with curriculum content? And essentially that answer is pretty straightforward, but using curriculum content, right, that's the learning outcome, the homework assignments, bodies of knowledge, using that, comparing it to the individual KSA statements within the competency model, and then seeing, okay, based on XYZ number of activities, labs, is this providing students thorough coverage of this specific knowledge statement, for example? Is it exposing students to this knowledge statement? Or in cases where I'm not covering that knowledge statement at all, I would put a gap in this coverage column here. So you can kind of see how gathering curriculum content and using that will help determine that thorough exposure and gap curriculum coverage within the assessment. So we will hop back to Menti to make this example of curriculum coverage and those three levels a little bit clearer. So if you all don't mind popping back to the Menti link there, we've got our next question. Just taking a second to load here. Okay, so it should be showing up for y'all now. So describe what exposure means within the context of curriculum coverage. Some responses populate. Yeah, these are all spot on. Content is covered briefly, but not at length or in detail. That's fantastic. Introductory, surface level. These are all spot on. Yep. So instead of thinking as curriculum coverage as binary, yes, no, we have three different levels. No is really gap, and then yes is kind of split between exposure and thorough. So these are all of these answers look spot on. Okay, next one here, just describe what thorough means within the context of curriculum coverage. Okay, I feel like this group is taking on quickly. That's also 100% correct. So we'll flip to some more a little bit more challenging questions here, but yes, these are all spot on. More depth than exposure and deep understanding of the specific knowledge, skill, and abilities. Perfect. Okay, so we'll move into an example here. So let's say a single homework assignment is introducing blueprint terms and has students practice making a couple of basic drawings. Based on that, how would you mark coverage of this knowledge statement within the Ohio Manufacturing Competency Model? Knowledge of engineering drawings, blueprint schematics, and technical specifications. Would you consider that a gap? It's exposing students to that knowledge statement, or it's thoroughly covering that knowledge statement? The results for a second. Okay, yeah, pretty much a consensus on that being considered exposure. And I would agree with that. It's not quite a gap. I'd say if there was no, if this course curriculum did not have any activities, homework assignments, or things tied to blueprints, that would be considered a gap. But with that homework assignment and practice with basic drawings, agree with the assessment of exposure here. Okay, two more to just nail it home and truly get the hang of it. So a curriculum includes a lab activity and a hands-on exam associated with instrument calibration. How would you mark coverage of this skill statement? Skill in calibrating instruments accurately, following calibration procedures, and documenting calibration records. A lab and hands-on exam. All right, yep, you guys have got the hang of it. So that one also agree this would constitute as thorough coverage. Significant amount of depth and quality given to this specific topic. So yep, agree with y'all there. And then our last one, you'll be shocked with what the answer might be to this one. So a curriculum does not include content on electrical and electronic systems. So would you mark this knowledge statement as gap, exposure, or thorough? Knowledge of units of measurement for voltage, current, power, and resistance. Yes, that is 100% right. That would be considered a gap. They're not covering that, so that knowledge statement is a gap within the curriculum. That's right. All right. So we'll keep moving on here. So I think safe to say you have curriculum coverage down pat. So then how does that feed into the strategic recommendations that you'll see populated after that? So essentially this orange table here with the gray lines, the left-hand side of this is going to be everything that's contained within the Ohio Manufacturing Competency Model repository. So that's the individual KSA statements, and then also the employer deemed criticality. So I can see here knowledge of calibration procedures. Manufacturers said that is very critical.
You said you're doing what?
Oh. If someone wouldn't mind just muting there. Perfect. They said that was a highly critical knowledge statement for their entry-level workforce. So that's all going to be within the model repository. Then what you're going through by assessing your individual curriculum and denoting in this third column here is the curriculum coverage, right? Which is the examples we just walked through. So you can kind of see based on the criticality and then also the curriculum coverage, what is the kind of sample strategic recommendation or decision that can be deduced from that. So in this first example, we're just using a sample curriculum here. They are not covering that knowledge of calibration procedures, yet employers were saying that that was highly critical. So that would be tagged as something that should be prioritized within curriculum pretty soon. That's like a high priority change. But if we take a look down to the fourth row there, skill in reading and interpreting electrical schematics, employers said that that's very critical for us, and the sample curriculum is already thoroughly covering it. So in that case, it's the case that the criticality is matching the right level of curriculum coverage. So it's, no changes needed, thumbs up. The depth and quality of instruction, continue to maintain that because it's highly critical for employers. And then if we look at something like an example, the fifth one down, skill in identifying opportunities for improved ergonomic workstation layout. So employers said that one's a little bit lower criticality within the sample curriculum. It's a gap, and maybe that's okay, right? That's a permissible gap because it's not being covered, and employers are saying that there's other knowledge, skills, and abilities that are more important. So that one's okay to leave out of curriculum for now. I'll mention that the plan is that this manufacturing competency model is reviewed annually. So criticality and the knowledge, skill, and ability statements might change year over year to reflect the latest workforce and skill needs and new technologies entering the sector. So it's constantly reflective of manufacturer needs. But basically, yeah, this is showing kind of the different combinations based on criticality and curriculum coverage that is going to lead to kind of a different decision trap, if you will, based on those combinations. So we'll move into another Menti that really brings the two pieces that we just took a look at together, the curriculum coverage and criticality. So if y'all don't mind popping back to the Menti link here, and we'll go through our next question. So if a curriculum is thoroughly covering a KSA and that was deemed low criticality, what might you recommend to curriculum developers based on that combination? Yep, these look spot on. Yep, consider reducing the amount of coverage. Totally agree with that one. So it's thoroughly covering, spending a lot of time on a low criticality KSA. So focus more on higher criticality KSAs. Yep. Divert time to higher criticality coverage that may have a gap. This is spot on. Let's see. Lesson coverage. Yep. These are all excellent answers. Okay. Kind of another hypothetical for y'all here. So if a curriculum is exposing a KSA that was deemed medium criticality, what would you recommend to curriculum developers in this case? So exposing a KSA that is medium criticality. Mhm. Okay, yep. So I would agree with the ones keep as is. This seems well aligned. That's right. Like the coverage here, exposure is matching that it's medium criticality. For something that's higher criticality, we would want something slightly more. So that's where you'd want to maybe add some content, but I think this one is an example of where it's very well aligned. Yep, this seems acceptable, well aligned. Those answers are correct. Yep. Awesome. Okay. Well, I will pass it over to wonderful partner and colleague over at Lorraine to kind of walk us through what those possible combinations are. Courtney,
Awesome.
over to
Thank
you.
you. Yeah. Thank you. So I'm Courtney Hanover. I'm with Lorain County Community College, and we've had the opportunity to go through a curriculum assessment with one of our programs. And thank you to our faculty that I think are on this call today for all the help that they've done, and Lori Kraft. So during this step, this chart was very helpful to me in getting from, okay, we have the information from employers, we have our curriculum assessment. Now, what does that mean and what are we going to do with it? So this chart allows you to see 9 possible strategic recommendations to the curriculum assessment that you've conducted. And it would be helpful in the last few questions that you just answered as well. So you'll see on the left-hand side are your criticality measurements, so your high, medium, low, and that is based on the Ohio manufacturers, what they have provided. And then at the top is your gap, exposure, and thorough coverage that you found through your curriculum review and your content. So just for a few examples, if you're looking at the bottom left in the red, it's listed as high criticality. So your employers have deemed it very important, but it's very low and there's a gap in your curriculum. So this is an area that you would want to prioritize in increasing the course or hands-on activities that are within your curriculum to address this topic. And then looking at the bottom middle in the yellow, it's still a high criticality, but students are exposed to it. So there is a little more in your curriculum, but you would still want to add a little bit more hands-on or more technical overview of that topic. And then looking in the bottom right in the green, you have high criticality and thorough coverage. So it's just right. You have the amount that is needed to address the employer's needs. So when looking at this chart, and you'll see in the spreadsheet when you're doing the assessment that those areas that are red are the ones that you'll want to look at first. Even if it is a low criticality and thorough coverage, you could have too much information and you don't need to go that in depth. So all of the assessments and curriculum that go through this process will have a different percentage of red, yellow, and green, but it helps to take a very quick look at what you need to prioritize as you're going through the curriculum assessment.
Wonderful. Thank you, Courtney. All right, and off to you, Claire, to show how this comes together in the spreadsheet.
Alrighty, so this should look pretty familiar from what Kelsey showed us earlier in this call. The left side of this is the competency model content. So you can see that number, type, the manufacturing competencies, and then those next 4 columns, which are highlighting for each KSA, whether it's relevant at the entry or mid-level, and then how relevant is it, how critical is it at each of those levels. So the curriculum assessment Excel, left side is competency model, and the right side, those last 4 columns, is really the curriculum assessment materials. So the curriculum coverage and source columns are the only 2 columns that are going to need a manual input here. So an educator going through would look at each KSA and then fill out that curriculum coverage column and say either, yes, my course is thoroughly covering this, it's only exposing this, or it's a gap. They would then also fill out this source column just to explain where in the curriculum that is, just so if someone's going in and validating or updating this, it's really easy for them to follow along. And then those last 2 columns are going to be auto-populated to reflect that matrix that Courtney just took us through. So you can see in this example, the knowledge statement was medium criticality for entry-level and mid-level occupations. So the 2 recommendations are keep as is for both occupation levels. And the reason that we have the two different columns is because we asked manufacturers to give us two different criticality scores for the knowledge, skill, and ability statements. They were saying that some of these KSAs might be very relevant for an operator and not quite as relevant for a technician. So depending on what type of course you're evaluating and whether the target audience is for operators or technicians, there's going to be a different recommendation based on whether the occupation group is really in need of that specific knowledge, skill, or ability statement. So I will quickly pop up the Excel so everyone can kind of get a look of how it actually looks in practice. And then we're going to do an activity with everyone where you're going to fill out your own mini curriculum assessment. So feel free to pop up the workbook that was sent over prior to this call. And again, if you haven't received that, just throw your email in the chat and we'll make sure that you get that so you can follow along with me here. So in the Excel, Kelsey already took us again through columns A through H. For the sake of just this demo, I'm going to go ahead and hide columns D through F just to make it a little bit easier for everyone to see my screen. Again, the only two columns that need to be filled out are the curriculum coverage and the source column. So I'm going to go quickly through this tolerancing example. The knowledge statement is knowledge of geometric dimensioning and tolerancing in general tolerancing principles and standards for part manufacturing. From employers, we heard that this was only relevant for entry-level occupations and it was medium criticality. So as someone who's conducting the assessment, I would go over to the course content. And in this case, we have a book of knowledge that was also sent to everyone prior to this call. Scrolling through the book of knowledge, you can see this statement right here that this curriculum covers part tolerancing. They describe common methods used for part tolerancing, and they describe the impact that tolerances have on part production and quality. And it's just at the remember and understand basis. So from this, it sounds like they're probably pretty thoroughly covering that knowledge statement, but it doesn't sound like there's any hands-on components. So I don't think it would be covering the skill or ability statement. So going back here, I would argue that this was thoroughly covered. And in the source, I will say the book of knowledge, I think it was like 5.1 and 5.2. And you can see that the entry-level program recommendation auto-populates to assess demand because employers were saying this was medium criticality. The curriculum is thoroughly covering it. So if there's an opportunity to maybe scale back that coverage, something to look into. And this is a great example of sometimes when you're doing this curriculum assessment, the curriculum will be kind of broad and not super detailed. So it's an opportunity to go back to the actual professors or teachers that are teaching the content and ask, what exactly do you mean when you say that you're covering parts tolerancing? Like, how thorough is that coverage? Are there homework assignments? Is there anything hands-on so that you can really suss out whether this truly is thorough or maybe it's more of an exposure statement? But just based on the book of knowledge, I would go with thorough for that one. Any questions on this process before Victoria walks us through an activity for you all? And one other thing I'll note, right now we're just looking at that manufacturing sector-wide layer, but we also have this Excel set up for the electric vehicle and the aerospace and defense industry layers. So if you were to be assessing an EV-specific program, you could compare that against those industry-specific models as well. But I will pass it back to Victoria to talk us through how to get everyone in this call sort of hands-on in the process.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire. Okay, so yes, we'll conduct a mini curriculum assessment, if you will, on this call. So I'd ask if you don't have it open already, have that PDF, the Certified Manufacturing Associate Book of Knowledge, and then also the Manufacturing Assessment tab within the Excel that was sent out earlier as well. So you have those two documents up side by side. we'll just give our hand and give it a try for a couple of topics and associated KSA statements. So we'll kind of have some heads down, silent time for about 5 or so minutes here and take a look through that book of knowledge. And then for these 3 topics here, lean thinking, production methods, and safety, mark the KSAs that cascade underneath that is either thorough, exposure, or gap based on what you're finding in the Tooling U SME body of knowledge. And those specific rows that you'll be looking and entering information in are called out on the slide here, and then they're also highlighted in yellow on your workbook. So we'll come back in about 5 minutes and take a look at what you populated and make sure we're kind of all understanding the curriculum coverage definitions and source columns the same. So we'll start a timer for about 5 minutes and then come back as a group.
Thanks to those who are going through this practice activity. It's helpful to be able to answer your questions as you go through a sample activity. We joked last time we started at 90 or so folks, and now we're getting to 78. This is where we see where the doers are gonna stay on. So thanks for practicing with us. We'll answer any questions y'all have along the way if you're stuck on something.
Yeah, and maybe we use like the hand raise feature within Teams just to indicate if you're done going through at least maybe 2 of the 3 topics we have on screen here.
And no worries to those that have a 2:30 and have to drop. We will be recording this content and send it out to all of you.
Right, we're about at 5 or so minutes here. Nikki, you are such a brave soul. Thank you for raising your hand. Would you at all feel comfortable walking us through either lean thinking or production and safety and how you measured curriculum coverage there? No wrong answers.
Great. I love that. Love no wrong answer. Okay, so you said 2 or 3, and then I got a little nervous because I only did 2. I did the 4.311 and the 4.312 under lean thinking and continuous
yeah.
improvement. So the first one was a knowledge of lean principles, methodologies, philosophies, and tools and techniques for waste reduction. And then based off of the book of knowledge for lean, which was the 4.15 section, I noticed that there was a remember and understand underneath principles to be able to sort and set in order, restate terms associated with 5S principles, restate examples of each term specific to a person's work environment, understand principles and terminology of lean, describe the 7 forms of waste, value added, so on and so forth. So I put for knowledge of lean principles, methodologies, philosophies, and tools, I put thorough. But then under skills and applying lean principles to identify and eliminate waste, I put gap.
Nikki, 100%. Yes, we had the exact same for that one. Well done.
A little
Yes.
harder when it's not your program, right?
Right.
So thank you for testing the process out with us.
Yes. Also love that, yeah, you used the remember and understand. I think there's like another, understand and apply. Maybe that would be indication for some of those that it's like this skill might have a greater level of coverage. But yes, agree on thorough for the knowledge statement, but mostly due to the fact that the lean principles are remember and understand and not practical application. Yeah, that skill and applying would agree with you on gap there. Thanks, Nikki. Does anyone else feel comfortable? I think we've got safety and then production methods, walking through the results. Any other takers out there? Okay, well, maybe we do this one as the safety one as a group here. So, all right, so there we go. Okay, so one of our other topics is all around safety. So our first one here, knowledge of safety standards like OSHA and HAZCOM. If I then pop up the book of knowledge, let's see, I can see that there's a whole section on safety here. I see, let me zoom in a little bit. They're talking about OSHA standards, OSHA regulations, and PPE. Remember and understand, but looks like it has quite a few of them where the students asked to describe what OSHA is and have a basic understanding. So I would say for that knowledge statement, I think that kind of is pretty safely a thorough coverage. Skill in following implemented safety programs, safety training, and identifying mitigating workplace hazards. Based on some of the safety statements here, does anybody have a guess? Like, would you read these and think that that skill statement is being thoroughly covered, or students exposed to it, or is that really a gap? Any guesses there?
Bill says gap. Mark says gap. David says gap.
Well done. That's right. I would agree with those. 100%. Yep. So skill, the knowledge statement, yes, but skill in applying those standards, I would say based on this body of knowledge and the descriptions here, that's not being covered. So would also agree that is a gap. Great. All right, before we move on to our next piece, is last call if anybody wants to try their hand at production methods, which I think was our last example. Okay, all right, we will continue plugging on then. Alrighty. So we have gone through the competency model initiative, how the repository itself was built, what is a curriculum assessment, and gone through an example of how to conduct that, and then being able to see the formulas that result based on criticality and curriculum coverage. So I think Claire is going to now walk us through kind of some of those reports that are available to you all to make sense of everything that results and can summarize after you've performed the assessment.
Yep. Thanks, Victoria. Yep. So as you guys saw going through that, it's a very detailed Excel. There's a lot of lines there, so pretty hard to just look at the Excel and know what to take away from that. So we've developed some dashboards to help kind of automate the reports. Help you share the results out to your colleagues, and also think about the next steps going forward. So quickly going to share my screen here, and we'll talk you all through the dashboards that we have. So this is in the workbook that you just had up. We were in the manufacturing assessment tab previously, but now if you go to the next tab, the manufacturing entry-level dashboard, you can see some of these graphs that we put together. So there is no manual input on these dashboard tabs. It'll all just auto-populate for you. So starting at the top here, we have a count of the KSAs across the entry-level, mid-level, and full model that fell into each of those categories that correspond to that strategic recommendation matrix. So you can see here that for KSAs that were relevant for entry level or operator occupation group, 10 fell into that thoroughly covered high criticality bucket, 7 were high criticality and only exposed, and then 62 were high criticality and gaps. And just heads up, this is just dummy data for the sake of this session. So then you can see the totals in this column, in this row here, where we're saying across entry level, there are 16 thoroughly covered KSAs, 14 exposed, and 136 gaps, which corresponds to 10% of the entry level KSAs being covered, 8% exposed, and 82% gaps. And again, the reason we have a different data for the entry level and mid-level model is because some KSAs were only relevant for the mid-level occupations and others were only relevant for the entry-level occupation. So when you kind of sum all of that up, we can see this summary view across the entry and mid-level. So we see that for the entry level, there were 62 high priority changes. So 62 KSAs that fell into high criticality, but missing from the curriculum, or low criticality and thoroughly covered in the curriculum. 72 were that yellow, medium priority, and then 32 were low priority or no changes necessary, meaning that the coverage in the curriculum matched what employers were saying the criticality was for that knowledge, skill, or ability statement. So you can kind of sum that up in this overview graphic that just shows that the high level, how many high priority changes should you be focusing on, how many medium priority changes, and then what % of the competencies cover is hit spot on in the curriculum. And then finally, if scrolling to the right, we have this just general competency coverage across the entire model. So this is just looking across every single knowledge, skill, ability. How many did your curriculum cover? How many did your curriculum expose? And then finally, how many were missing from your curriculum, regardless of whether those were relevant for entry and mid, and regardless of their criticality. Any questions on that those first few graphics? Okay. I will be passing it over to our friend Lori Kraft from Lorain County Community College to take us through the rest of the dashboard, because she had the opportunity to actually go through and do this curriculum herself with this curriculum assessment herself with a few curricula.
Okay,
Over
thank
to
you,
Lori.
Claire. Oh, thanks, Claire. Yeah, we had the opportunity to evaluate a curriculum in manufacturing. It was actually a proposed curriculum or a proposed program. And so I went through the model in detail. And I really like the table that Claire is showing right now. It's a nice summary of the Excel spreadsheet, because obviously the Excel spreadsheet is pretty complex. So across the top, you'll see the recommendations that were based on the coverage and the criticality. Those are the 9 boxes that Courtney took us through earlier. And then on the left, you'll see the sub-competencies listed. And the numbers that are in this table are the number of KSAs that fall into those categories. And so as a curriculum developer, I encourage the faculty to really look at the red boxes first. In other words, that prioritized inclusion sticks out because those are highly critical KSAs that fell into the gap category. In other words, those are missing from the curriculum. And so as I go down the numbers there, I do see a 10 that kind of jumps out under prioritize inclusion, row 25. So manufacturing processes might be a really good start to look at, because again, those are highly critical missing KSAs. And then I also see a 9 below that on, I think that's preventative and predictive maintenance. So again, other KSAs that are missing. And then at the bottom, I have a total of 62 total KSAs in the prioritized inclusion category. And so I know that there's a lot of work to do there, probably starting with those 62. And then if I want a breakdown percentage-wise, in row 39, it tells me that 37% of my curriculum fall into the prioritized inclusion category. So a great place to start, can knock out 37% of the curriculum by just addressing the KSAs in that, that recommendation category. And then as you go across from left to right, you'll see the total KSAs in every category, as well as the percentages, the breakdown of which or what part of the curriculum falls into each of those recommendations. And of course, I didn't have to fill in any of these numbers because it does self-populate once you fill in the model, the original model. Okay, you can scroll down. Now, I really like this visual. Again, it's repeating the information that you just saw above in the table, but it's a nice representation, and you can see exactly how much of that curriculum falls into the red prioritized inclusion category. Again, that's where we're starting our recommendation. And then you also see that plan integration is a significant part of the recommended procedure here. Now, plan integration also is a gap in the curriculum, but that's medium criticality with the KSAs. So I would start on the left with the prioritize inclusion, because those are highly critical, followed by the plan integration category, since those are medium criticality, and again, those are missing. And then I would probably recommend jumping over to the other yellow boxes on the right-hand side. And then at the very end, the green, if at all. Maybe the green are fine and we don't have to talk about those. But again, a really nice way to visualize these results. Okay, and you can scroll down a little bit more. Now, these charts were really nice because then you can take an even deeper dive into each of those recommended categories. And since I was recommending starting with the prioritize inclusion, I would start with the one that you see right there on the left. And again, we're just counting the KSAs at this point. So the 10 in manufacturing processes kind of jump out at me, and that would probably be a good place to start. And followed very closely by 9 in the preventative health and safety, which is the first category there. And then the other way that I use this information is I went back to the original model and I determined how many of these are Ks, how many are S, and how many are As. In other words, how many of these were knowledge statements that were missing, how many were skills and abilities that were missing. Because again, as a curriculum developer, I'm thinking, well, a knowledge statement could come from, the lecture content, and maybe that's a good place to start. Whereas with skills and abilities that are missing, that could come from labs or hands-on activities, projects, or maybe some kind of work-based experience. So again, being able to break that down for faculty is really useful because then we can determine a plan a little bit easier. Where to focus? Do we want to focus on lecture? Do we want to focus on lab? And then, of course, which sub-competencies and topics do we need to address? Okay, and I believe this goes back to Victoria.
Great, thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
All right, let me go ahead and pop up screen again. So yes, a lot of reports available to you all that summarize the results of the curriculum assessment and then where to focus efforts, as Lori just went through. So we have on the screen here sample assessment output, and I'll let Kelsey kind of guide us through the activity we'll run with this one.
For sure. Thanks, Victoria. Alrighty, so we're going to build a little bit more on the dashboard tools that Claire and Lori just shared. So I'm going to focus on our strategic recommendations grid view breakdown here. So the purpose of this grid view is to show kind of just at a glance the percent breakdown of each strategic recommendation from the curriculum assessment, like both Claire and Lori mentioned. So it's one thing I do want to kind of call out is it's important to note that the size of the box doesn't necessarily indicate the priority of change. So those high priority changes are going to be shaded in red, moderate priority changes in yellow, and then anything that doesn't necessarily require any change will be shaded in green. So just kind of looking through based on the grid results on the right, as an educator, I would want to tackle the prioritize inclusion and de-emphasize relevant KSA buckets first before moving on to the KSAs under the moderate need for change category. And we'll go a little bit further into depth on kind of what to do with all these results after and how to kind of get into the weeds and make some of those curriculum enhancements. But before we get there, we do have a quick Menti activity for you all based on this specific grid view. So given the grid view shown on the right here, we're going to pull up a Menti question and ask, what are some conclusions you could draw from the assessment results? And I will post a screenshot of this grid view in the chat as well to help, so we can see our grid view and the Menti results flowing in here at the same time. There you go. So in the chat, that's the grid that we just showed. All right, let's see. So it does not integrate with current Odoo courses easily. May need a little bit more context there for whoever left this comment here. This is, I guess I should have prefaced, this is just a sample assessment output. So this isn't directly taken from any curriculum that we've assessed personally. So this is more just like high level, what are some things that you notice about the results here? All right, there's quite a bit of correction needed in the medium priority changes. Yep, agree. A lot of the high percentage categories are within that medium criticality gap range, so the plan integration recommendation type. It's higher. The overall percentage of those moderate changes is higher than the overall percentage of high criticality changes, which is good. Better more yellow than red, right? Looks like quite a bit of additional content may be needed to address the gaps. So more gaps than there are things to take out. Gaps. So we're seeing out of the two high priority change categories, we see that there's more prioritized inclusion than there is de-emphasized. So that's where we'd make the recommendation to enhance the curriculum content in terms of adding in more content to cover some of those gaps. Awesome. All right, I think, Victoria, I'm just gonna, for sake of time, I'll go ahead and pass it back over to you to go over some of those recommendations on prioritizing the changes. Oh, I think you're muted, Victoria.
You know, I managed to make it through the start of 2024 without doing that, but it had to come to an end at some point. March 19th was. So we've gone through the templatized reports and kind of how to make some assumptions and takeaways both based on those reports available to you. So now you've got those reports and assessments in hand. How do you begin to action plan or start to take into account, you know, maybe some curriculum enhancements or things to address if you'd like to better align with the competency model? So you know, this follows that matrix that we were taking a look at earlier with those 9 different buckets, and it's organized in a sequence that allows for the most impactful changes to be implemented first. So when considering like where to tweak curriculum, I would start with those in the prioritize inclusion bucket, and then also those within de-emphasize. So prioritize inclusion, this is going to give you an indication of which types of topics are really important and you're not currently covering. So you can begin to have a conversation around how can we integrate some of these topics in curriculum. Some examples we mentioned earlier, you know, is it working with your regional industry sector partnership to connect with manufacturers to donate a case study or a work-based learning opportunity, or maybe it's in identifying some equipment needs to help close that gap. You know, on the other side of this is the de-emphasize bucket, where maybe the path to correct that change is a little bit easier because it's just a matter of taking content out and allowing for new content to come in rather than introducing new content. And then after those two, I would take a look at the medium priority changes. So these are, you know, kind of the tweak buckets, maybe over-indexing a little bit on lower criticality items or not indexing enough on things that are important. So would take a look at those 4 recommendation types after and begin to action plan around that. And then, you know, we've run this curriculum assessment with 4 pilot partners, Lori and Courtney and team over at Lorraine, Tooling U SMEs, Certified Manufacturing Associate Program, OACC's Intro to Manufacturing, and I'm forgetting one, Comp's Work Advance Program, or Proposed Work Advance Program. In running that pilot, kind of had some interesting takeaways or other things you could look at that might help start to put together this action plan. So another kind of thing you can look at is, are my gaps mostly following it coming from knowledge statements, or is it mostly at the skill and ability statement that I have a lot of gaps? if it's at the skill and ability statement, that might be an indication of like the types of activities, more hands-on lab types things, to really bolster the coverage for those S and A tied statements. And then maybe another thing to consider or question to look at is, what is the spread of my KSA coverage? Am I noticing that a lot of my gaps are falling in the same topic? So production operations or manufacturing systems, I have a lot of gaps there, or is the spread of KSA gaps spread across many of the different topics? So that can kind of be something to look at and might lend itself to an action plan as well. All right, and then I will pass it to Nick to kind of talk through different ways of approaching manufacturers with these curriculum assessment results in hand.
Thanks, Victoria. So I think we went through a lot today, right, in terms of how to use this tool and what are those outputs and what do you do with them. And so as you start to stack that up, I think the art and really the real magic of this tool is not to be a audit of educators. If that's how it feels, that's definitely not the goal of this program and this initiative. It is to really be an alignment tool to help educators and training providers provide manufacturers with a really clear articulated list of what they're providing in their programs in a terminology that manufacturers, one, understand, and two, define themselves. So see this as what I've kind of deemed the big decodifier ring in common language for skills across operators and technicians. And so two things may come out of this. You may have some really high competency overlap, which is phenomenal, right? And so some of the things you can do right off the bat when you see this high competency overlap is start to promote those programs to the employers in your region, in your local base, as a place that's graduating industry ready talent that they've defined, and you can clearly articulate back exactly how and where you're creating these competencies. And I think it's also an opportunity to say, well, if I'm creating this opportunity and it aligns exactly your need, how do we create these ready to hire commitments and, start to think about how manufacturers that will soon to be formal endorsees of this model, how do we tie them into you all for pipeline, and then further create more enrollment opportunities for all of you as educators and program providers. And then on the other side of it, where there's low competency overlap, there's a clear path to find ways to close that gap. I see a number of ISPs or industry sector partners on this call that are just kind of listening in to make sure they understand the questions you all asking and are ready to support you all. The only endorsed industry sector partners or consortium of manufacturers that are right in your backyard are there and available to help you figure out how to close the gap. So I encourage all of you, as you find gaps in your curriculum that you might not know how to solve or your faculty needs partnership with, reach out to your local ISPs, reach out to the OMA so they can get you connected to the manufacturers in your backyard to solve those talent and competency issues, and figure out how they can supply things maybe that they do in-house in training their folks. Then they don't have to do that again when they hire them, or, as an example. And so I think this is really just more of an opportunity for the entire ecosystem of Ohio to better kind of work across the talent supply chain, and use this as one formal way to kind of have a discussion. It's very easy when every educator and every manufacturer in the state is using one tool to drive and understand how they are and are not aligned. It makes it a lot easier, I'm sure, for you all. We know it does for the manufacturers to not have different conversations with different stakeholders and all stay aligned. So that's the ultimate goal of this work. We know it's not perfect. We know an Excel model is not the best way to possibly do this, and we are going to continuously try to improve and make this an easier tool, and ask you all to give that continuous feedback as you start to dive in. But we're hoping that this gets us on our way to a better aligned workforce system for manufacturing and each of the new industry sectors that keep coming into the great state of Ohio. So with that, and how do you take those outcomes, we'd love to kind of wrap us with a couple things. First, we just want to know how you're feeling about today. We know that was a lot of content really quickly, and so we're not naive to think that you're just going to be able to pick everything up and go. But we do want to gauge how you're feeling. Is this something that you feel I am so lost, Or is this something that, you feel we've done a decent job to get you up to speed on some of these tools and you're ready to give it a shot and pilot and reach out where you have questions? So we'll pass it over to the mentee really quick and just would love to gauge, the 55 or so folks that have remained on the call with us. Thank you. Where you're at. Got one middle. I'd love to see that red. That's awesome. Three folks. I'm hoping we have more than 4 folks that are ready to kind of get this stuff rolling. 5, 6, wonderful. Again, please fill that out. Keep filling that out. Let us know. It helps us better gauge, where we need to hone in. And so we won't be sharing the next 2 questions we have on the mentee. We want to keep that private for you all. But as you have lingering questions, please fill that out. If it's something you don't want to come on the chat or come out and bring up to the whole group, we have a question on the mentee that asks, any lingering questions. We will take a full QA of all the questions we get and send that out to the larger group. So we ran a session earlier this week. We inventoried some questions. Any questions y'all have offline that you want to ask, we will make sure that we answer those questions and get those back out to this larger group. And then finally, I think we had one more question. Oh, we just want to know how we did today. Is there things that we could improve as we continue to upskill folks such as yourselves on this work? We are always open to feedback and continuous improvement in this process. So that's the mentee, and it's great to see that there's already, at least 6 folks in this session that are ready to go on a pilot. So we're very excited for that. Today, I feel like we've hit all of our objectives. Raise your hand or push back if you disagree. But I think in 2 hours we got a lot done. And so as we kind of wrap up, I do want to point you all towards a couple places that you can go for resources that are available to you, and others that are coming down the pipe. So as we've shared a couple times in here, the Ohio Manufacturers Association, along with their partners, have developed a landing page for the competency model content. It's in version 1, so that thing's going to continue to be developed. Toolkits are going to get established and built on there, but all of those manufacturing, EV, EVSE, battery, aerospace and defense, foundational layer competency repositories are out there. They're downloadable. There's stuff out there already for you to just start to dive into and utilize. We'll be sharing the curriculum assessment findings report, so that's like a templatized version to take those dashboards and be able to put those out to your program managers, your deans, manufacturers themselves, ISPs, etc., as well as the curriculum assessment template that we'll be building for. We went through the base layer manufacturing one. There's also going to be one for EV, EVSE, and battery manufacturing, as well as A&D. So if you have a specific EV module you're building or thinking about building, and you want to see where you stack up in terms of the competencies defined by manufacturers, you'll use the same process, just different set of KSAs. And then as we think about next steps, keep going back to that web page, checking out content. I'm sure OMA will be blasting out a bunch of updates over the coming months of all that great stuff. And start to think about how you can start to organize around the programs you have within your institutions and start to use this tool. We think it's a great opportunity for everyone across the state to align to the manufacturer's needs for operators and technicians talent. And then I'll finally plug one last thing, and that is out on the webpage, but gotta plug OMA's workforce email as well. That's also a great place if you have questions that everybody's monitoring to make sure you get connected where you need to be. Any other questions from the group? I'll open it up. Oh, who's been involved from Odoo with this work? We've been working with a number of folks in Odoo, Graham Wood, Leah, Rob. We actually did a full assessment of the engineering and manufacturing standards that Odoo establishes for their CTE. And we did an overall alignment of the base layer manufacturing competency model with their previous standards. We found, Victoria, you can quote me, what was maybe not, we'll find it. I put it in the last session, so I probably should have had it. Very strong alignment, and where we had gaps, we actually made formal recommendations to them on how and where to close those gaps. And that work is now funneling all the way through up into ODHE as well. So Sherry Rice on the call is working with the articulation team as well, Rick Woodfield and the team at OACC to make sure all of this gets pieced together to help inform the standards at all levels of those systems. So we're very coordinated on that front. Absolutely, Susan. Today's recording, we'll send that out via email. We'll also probably find places that we can house this on the competency model website as well. It'll be out on OMA's YouTube page. So we'll get that out to this group. Thanks, David. Any other questions? Happy to answer them in the chat. Come off mute. Any comments from any partners?
Just want to say thank you to everybody for your participation today. We're really looking forward to the results of this and moving things forward. So thank you.
Awesome.
And Ellie from Cleveland State, I'll shoot you my email so we can line up.
Okay.
Wonderful. Well, everybody, thank you so much for, I know 2 hours and 15 minutes is a long time off your busy schedules. Hopefully you learned a thing or two and you got another tool in your tool belt. If not, we're happy to kind of help you out along the way to make sure you feel more comfortable. But appreciate you all and the work you do to grow our workforce system for manufacturers in the state of Ohio. We'll close the session out and make sure we get this recording to each and every one of you. But appreciate you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.